Hi, I'm Gerald. This is Stuff You Should Think About, a podcast about interesting things you should think about. And it's refreshing to bring you another episode. Today's episode is about how to find the history of your house. This is something you should know. Probably have thought about it, but you never really had time to do the research on it without a cause. You probably know your address. You probably know how many bedrooms your house has, when the trash gets picked up, and maybe even what color you're going to paint the living room. But here's something most people don't know. You can actually trace the history of your house. And in some cases, you can find out who lived there over 100 years ago. Kind of makes you look at your house a little differently, doesn't it? So, where do you even start? Well, believe it or not, you don't start with people, you start with the house. Take a walk around the outside and really look at it. Does the brick change color on one side? Does the roof line look uneven? Does one section seem newer than the rest? Those little details can tell you if additions were built years after the original house. Now, what about the inside? That's where things get interesting. Old hardwood floors, original doorknobs, glass handles, wide trim around the doors, or even an old staircase can all be clues to the home's age. Sometimes homeowners even find old newspapers inside walls or signatures left behind by carpenters during construction. So, once you've looked at the house itself, what's next? The next step is finding out when it was built. Now, that sounds simple, but the date isn't always exact. Older homes were sometimes recorded years after they were actually built. Still, it gives you a place to start. Once you know roughly when the house was built, you can ask another question: who was the first owner? That's where property records come in. Every time a house is bought or sold, there's usually a record of it. Many counties keep those records going back decades, and some go back much farther than that. If you keep following those records, you can often build a timeline of every owner the house has ever had. Now, here's something I didn't realize: property records tell you who owned the house, census records tell you who actually lived there. That's a big difference. Maybe a family rented the home for 20 years. Maybe several generations lived under one roof. Census records can sometimes tell you how many people lived there, what they did for work, where they were born, and even who their neighbors were. Pretty amazing when you think about it. But there's another place people forget to look: old newspapers. Why newspapers? Because if something important happened at that house, there's a chance it was mentioned. Maybe someone ran a business from the home. Maybe there was a fire, a wedding, or another event that made the local paper. And don't overlook old photographs. Local libraries and historical societies sometimes have pictures of neighborhoods taken decades ago. You might discover your house had a front porch that's now gone, different windows, or even a completely different front entrance. Here's another question: what if none of those records exist? Believe it or not, your neighbors might know more than the internet. Someone who's lived on the street for 40 or 50 years, they may remember the families who lived there, when additions were built, or stories that were never written down anywhere. So, why do people spend all this time researching an old house? For some people, it's simple curiosity. For others, it's about feeling connected to a place. When you learn the history of a house, it stops being just an address. It becomes part of a much bigger story. The family dinners, the birthdays, the holidays, The people who moved in full of hope, the people who eventually moved on. Every house has a history. The only question is how much of the story is still waiting to be discovered. Thanks for tuning in to the Stuff You Should Think About podcast. If you enjoyed this episode, please follow and comment. If you're watching on YouTube, subscribe and comment. Wherever you're listening, just make sure you become part of the family.